How's it going, everybody? Too Spooky here, and welcome back to Nen Explained, where we go in depth with the various Nen abilities and how they work. In this particular installment, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. Instead of going over a specific character's ability, we're going to take a step back to the fundamentals and take a look at Nen limitations and conditions, specifically how extreme limitations can lead to some very powerful abilities. And even further than that, we'll be taking a better look at the ultimate limitation, Nen After Death. If you've seen my original video going over Nen as a whole, or if you're just fairly knowledgeable about the entire Nen system, you're probably already familiar with the concept of Nen limitations and how they affect various abilities. But for those of you who are a bit confused on the subject, or you just need a little refresher, we'll cover the basics first. Basically, in most cases, Nen at its base level is of course a very powerful and useful ability, but a lot of times at the base level, the techniques and abilities that you could craft are nothing that couldn't be stopped by any above average individual. So to greatly strengthen one's own Nen abilities, the concept of limitations, restrictions, conditions, or whatever else you want to call it was developed. Basically, how these limitations work is while developing an ability, the user of said ability puts certain limitations in place to greatly strengthen the ability's power or effectiveness. This works because Nen itself is essentially an extension of your mind and body, and therefore it will react strongly to your personal desires and your determination to achieve them. A great example of limitations would be what Kurapika developed with his various chain-related abilities. In Kurapika's case, since he is a conjurer, Izunami made sure to explain to him that at base level, anything he conjured would only be equivalent to the actual real-life object that he could purchase basically anywhere. Which is why, instead of wasting your energy by conjuring something that you can just buy off the street, he said to Kurapika that to truly craft something useful for his goals, he would need to put certain restrictions in place to strengthen the ability that he wanted to create. So for Kurapika's goal of an unbreakable chain, he created the condition that he is only able to use his chain jail techniques on members of the Phantom Troupe, and if he were to break that limitation, he would die. Because giving up his own life to keep this condition in check is basically considered the ultimate sacrifice, the chain from chain jail becomes extremely powerful, to the point where it is borderline unbreakable. In fact, the only way to actually break out of that chain is with brute force, since it also places the captured victim in a state of zetsu. However, even Uvo, the physically strongest member of the Phantom Troupe, was unable to break free of those chains, meaning that the restriction of only capturing spiders at the price of death, if this rule is ever broken, is indeed a very costly limitation in return for great power. Kurapika also has many other limitations for his various other abilities, so if you want to learn more about that, well, feel free to click that card in the top right hand corner of the screen. Because every individual is different, with different goals and things that they are willing to sacrifice to achieve them, limitations can be basically anything. But obviously, based on our example with Kurapika, the more costly the restriction, the more powerful your ability will be in return. However, that being said, the biggest issue with restrictions is the fact that if you break the rules that you yourself set in place, there will be consequences. And for instance, if you had not set any specific punishments for yourself when making these restrictions, the likelihood is that you will lose your Nen entirely if you end up breaking those rules. But this also relies entirely on how strict your restrictions actually are. But either way, breaking those rules is a big no-no. One thing I specifically wanted to talk about in this video would be Adult Gon, because I know some people out there are probably a little bit confused on how he was able to achieve so much power seemingly out of nowhere. But put simply, Gon decided to give basically everything he had, his ability to use Nen, his natural talent, and even a large chunk of his lifespan to gain the required power to beat Pito, which manifested in the form of growth to an adult, with the addition of power that was unrivaled even for one of the Chimera Ant Royal Guards, as Pito was taken down within only a few attacks. Pito even mentioned that Gon was now as strong as Meruem, which based on Meruem's display of power against Netero, we can assume that Gon would have been considered one of the strongest hunters in existence for that short period of time. Whether or not he was actually as strong or stronger than Meruem is unknown, but I think we can assume if nothing else, it would have been a very close fight. In regards to the power that he was given, we can also assume that due to Gon's natural talent and efficiency with Nen, he probably would have been able to obtain this power naturally throughout his life if he didn't give everything up. As Killua even mentioned that it would have taken multiple decades of constant training to actually achieve a form like that, meaning that if Gon hadn't been in such an emotional state and gave everything away for power, he probably could have actually achieved this power on his own with time and training in the future. So although Gon was able to gain this massive power, if only for a short time, it cost him basically everything, and after the fact he was basically a shriveled up California raisin on the brink of death. That was also dubbed unhealable until Nanika was able to actually miraculously heal him. However, like Pito predicted, even though Gon was now completely healthy, he no longer has use of his Nen. Or a better way to phrase this would be that Gon completely lost his ability to use Nen, or essentially he reverted back to square one where he can't even see it on himself or others. So as Jing mentioned, his aura is still there. However, Gon likely lost his ability to ever control it again. Either that, or Gon will eventually be able to use Nen again, but he needs to redo the whole entire process of learning Nen in the first place. Meaning he needs to get his aura nodes reopened, he needs to relearn the basic techniques, etc. So even after giving everything away for his adult form, there is still a chance that Gon will get his Nen back in the future by retraining himself. But I also wouldn't hold your breath, as it may not be possible. We have yet to see. But for the time being, Gon ended up sacrificing his ability to use Nen while in his adult form. And although he also sacrificed a lot more than that at the time, Nanika was generous enough to restore most of what he lost. So from this, we can take away the fact that Gon is not only very lucky, but we can also take away the fact that restrictions are indeed a force to be reckoned with, as they can grant you seemingly invincible power, however, at a great cost. The final thing we're going to talk about today would be the ultimate limitation, Nen After Death. Normally you'd think that once somebody dies, their Nen just simply dies with them. However, this is actually far from the case. We first learned about the idea of Nen After Death from Finks, who stated that Nen doesn't always disappear. In fact, in some cases, it even grows much stronger. The reason for this is simply because Nen that happens to remain after death usually holds some sort of pre-existing condition to remain, or naturally holds its former user's negative and vengeful emotions for the sole purpose of extracting revenge in whatever way they can. Although we also know that other emotions can also bring Nen back from the dead. The reason that Nen After Death is so powerful is because death can be seen as the ultimate limitation. If Gon was able to achieve that immense amount of power by giving up only a fraction of his life, if someone were to give up their entire life, they essentially have nothing left to give. Meaning that after death, the Nen in question will become as strong as it possibly can to carry out its final duty. To give some examples of what I mean, let's look at the various instances of Nen abilities activating after their user's death. The first actual example we've seen was with Pito's ability Terpsichora, due to the fact that Pito was so devoted to protecting and serving Meruem, after seeing the threat of Gon's power and fearing that he would be able to possibly kill Meruem, those emotions fueled her Terpsichora ability after her death, causing it to become a zombie reborn for the sole purpose of killing Gon. Because the ability was reborn through the limitation of death itself, it was also able to perform its duty to the absolute best of its ability, which ended up using Pito's corpse to sever Gon's arm while in his adult form. Although after that, Gon was able to put a stop to that real quick. But even though Pito's ability couldn't achieve its overall goal, the fact that it was able to catch Gon off guard and even sever one of his limbs while he was in that state is rather impressive. The next two examples we saw would occur a bit later when Chrollo fought Hisoka. Chrollo basically explained that under normal circumstances, an ability that he stole with his ability will disappear from his book after the original owner of that ability dies. For instance, we saw that he no longer has Neon's future telling ability, meaning that she has since died. F in the chat, boys. However, Chrollo also mentioned that one of his stolen abilities did not disappear after its owner's death. In fact, it actually grew much more powerful to the point where Chrollo was able to keep it within his book. Later during the same fight, we saw the other example with Hisoka's death. Right before getting killed by Chrollo, Hisoka poured all of his emotion into his bungee gum ability, instructing it to come back to life after he dies, and essentially revive him by contracting on his heart and his lungs. Because the limitation on this request was death, bungee gum performed to its utmost capacity and actually brought Hisoka back to life by forcefully reviving him, even after he had likely been completely deceased for a short period of time. The final example we got to see was Camila, the second prince, or princess in this case, of the Kakin Empire. The ability in question appears in the form of a cat-like Nen beast. In that regard, the actual ability of this Nen beast apparently has to be fulfilled through Camila's death, meaning this ability cannot be used without death, and actually requires it. Although for this ability to activate, Camila also needs to be killed by another person. So not only does this ability have the limitation of her own death, but it also has the limitation of requiring another person to actually kill her. So with that knowledge, we can assume that this ability in particular is far more powerful than anything we've seen thus far, in terms of the sheer requirements for activation. After Camila is killed and the ability activates, a gigantic cat Nen beast will appear behind her killer and squash them within its paws. While squashing them, it's also simultaneously extracting every ounce of their life force, destroying their entire body in the process. The life force that was extracted then concentrates within the cat's tail. The cat then takes this life force and places it into Camila's mouth, which will heal all of her injuries and completely resurrect her from the dead. So although the cost of this ability is ultimately dying, which probably sucks a lot, she is not only able to come back to life afterwards, but also completely eradicate the person who took her life in the first place, making this honestly one of the most broken abilities in the series, if you ask me. The only issue would be that she can still receive injuries and feel every ounce of that pain, and if her assailant doesn't kill her, she just has to sit there and remain in pain and agony. However, based on the conditions of this ability, I'd be willing to bet that after she finally succumbs to death from the result of that person's inflicted injuries, the cat will restore all of her injuries regardless of what they are, and likely even have the ability to restore missing limbs. It's also very possible that this ability can work on multiple people at once if Camila were to be killed by more than one person, as she did urge multiple guards to shoot her at once, meaning that each of those guards who took a shot could also be deemed responsible for her death. However, again, this is just a mere possibility. Regardless though, in terms of Nen After Death, this ability is by far the most powerful one we've seen to date, and for good reason. But with that, I think we've successfully explained the concept of extreme Nen limitations, including the ultimate limitation of death, and why these limitations make Nen more powerful. Hopefully you learned something new or found a better understanding of how these limitations work. If you did, well, make sure to drop a fat like. Also, be sure to subscribe with those notifications on so you don't miss the next installment of Nen Explained. And while you're at it, be sure to comment which character's ability you would like to learn about next, or any particular Nen concepts that you would like to learn about as well. Drop a follow on Twitter at 2SpookyTube to keep up with the channel, and if you cannot get enough Hunter x Hunter content, well, be sure to click here for the previous Nen Explained video detailing Franklin's Nen abilities, or click here for a video about Kurapika's Nen abilities. Thanks for watching, and I will see you all soon with a new video.
Did you know that an adult African elephant can eat up to 136 kilograms of food each day?